Now, che diamine sarà?
Beth! Please tell me, where did you find that thing?
In the water, Doctor! In the sea!
In the golden age of flying saucers and Cold War paranoia, one creature came crashing down from the stars and made movie history. In 1957, audiences watched in awe as a fragile rocket from Venus brought something back, something that wasn't meant to survive on Earth. With groundbreaking stop-motion magic, stunning European ruins, and a creature you almost feel sorry for, 20 Million Miles to Earth became one of the most unforgettable and poignant sci-fi tragedies of the entire decade. But behind the camera, the story was just as dramatic. This was a film born from recycled film reels, uncredited musical geniuses, and a deep-seated Cold War paranoia that seeped into every single scene. These are 16 weird, unbelievable, and hidden facts about the film that turned an alien invasion into a heartbreaking story and cemented Ray Harryhausen as an undisputed legend of cinema. The creature's name, Ymir, was never spoken in the film. It is one of the most remarkable facts about the movie. You can watch the entire, completed film from start to finish, and you will never hear anyone on screen call the alien creature by its name. Not once. The now iconic name, Ymir, taken from Norse mythology, never leaves a single character's mouth. Even though it is now one of the most recognized and beloved creatures in all of science fiction history, the name only appeared in Ray Harryhausen's original production notes, on concept sketches, and in promotional materials that were released long after the movie's theatrical run. This deliberate omission gave the monster an eerie and powerful mystique. It wasn't a traditional villain with a title or a species that the scientists could easily define. It was simply the thing from Venus, a lost, confused, and terrified animal reacting to a strange and hostile new world. The silence around its name made it feel even more profoundly alien, like something humanity couldn't even begin to classify or understand. And maybe that's why, decades later, fans and historians still faithfully call it the Ymir. Not because the movie ever told them to, but because the legend of the creature, born from Harryhausen's brilliant artistry, grew all on its own. Harryhausen's first time filming in Rome shaped his entire visual identity when the stop-motion master, Ray Harryhausen, brought his workshop and his magical armatures overseas. It wasn't just a simple change of scenery for the production. It was a profound creative awakening that would shape the rest of his legendary career. Setting up shop in Rome, Italy, gave him access to ancient architecture, the warm and dramatic Mediterranean light, and a completely different visual rhythm than the flat, sterile studio backlots of Hollywood he was used to. He reportedly wandered the streets of the ancient city for days, sketching statues in the Borghese gardens and studying the crumbling, romantic ruins of the Roman Forum. He was imagining, with every sketch, how a creature from another planet, a being of pure science fiction, might move among these ancient symbols of human history. That powerful and poetic contrast, ancient, weathered human civilization versus something cosmic, new and dangerous, became a signature Harryhausen mood. It was a theme he would carry into almost every film he made after this one, from The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad to Jason and the Argonauts. You could say that 20 Million Miles to Earth didn't just bring an alien creature to Rome. It brought the ancient world of Rome into the mind of a modern visual effects legend, and his work was never the same again. The film's original title was completely different and far more generic, before it was given its grand, evocative, and wildly inaccurate title. The studio didn't even know what to call the film. During pre-production, the script floated around the Columbia Pictures lot with a number of generic working titles. Early drafts were called boring, and literal names like The Giant Ymir, and even worse, The Beast from Space. Both of these were quickly rejected by producer Charles Schneer for sounding too cheap and too pulpy, even by the low standards of 1950s sci-fi B-movies. Columbia's marketing department finally settled on a title that meant absolutely nothing scientifically. Venus is, in reality, much further than 20 million miles away, but it looked huge and evocative on a movie poster. The phrase, 20 million miles to Earth, sounded cosmic, terrifying, and impossibly vast. It was exactly the kind of sensationalist title that audiences of the 1950s, who were obsessed with space exploration, wanted. It evoked a sense of distance so great it felt mythic, the story of a creature crawling across the blackness of space itself just to reach our world. That marketing gamble worked perfectly. The title alone, with its promise of a grand, interstellar journey, was enough to pull kids and adults alike into theaters, long before they even saw a single frame of the tragic Ymir. The creature's movements were inspired by elephants, not reptiles, to make the Ymir feel alive and, more importantly, to give it a sense of weight and empathy. The master animator Ray Harryhausen didn't look to lizards, dinosaurs, or other reptiles, which had been the standard inspiration for movie monsters. Instead, he studied elephants. He spent days at the Los Angeles Zoo, meticulously sketching and observing how the massive animals shifted their weight, how they dragged their feet with a slow, ponderous rhythm, and how they swung their bodies with a deliberate, undeniable power. Every single frame of the Ymir's stop-motion movement came directly from those sketches and real-world observations. That's why the creature in the film never moves like a quick, mindless monster. It has a strange and mournful grace. Each step looks heavy, careful, and almost sad, as if it's a lost, intelligent animal, confused and trying to understand the new alien ground beneath its feet. This choice to base the animation on a mammal rather than a reptile infused the creature with a kind of pathos and empathy that very few monster movies of that time possessed. It's a subtle but brilliant detail. Once you notice it, the Ymir doesn't look like a beast at all. It looks like a lost, sentient being, trying to survive in a new world that instantly fears and despises it. The story almost took place in Chicago, not Italy, in the earliest drafts of the script. The crashed Venus rocket ship, the XY-21, didn't land off the beautiful, sun-drenched coast of Sicily, Italy. It was scripted to splash down much closer to home, right near Lake Michigan. The movie in this original concept was supposed to unfold in the familiar, concrete heart of Chicago, with the Ymir growing larger and eventually rampaging through the American streets and skyscrapers of the windy city. But Ray Harryhausen, who was gaining more creative control with each picture, pushed back hard. He wanted to move the setting overseas, to Italy. He had a powerful artistic vision. He wanted ancient, crumbling stone backdrops, places where the alien creature's presence would look both beautifully surreal and deeply tragic. Rome and Sicily offered the kind of epic ruins, classical statues, and ancient cathedrals that no Hollywood backlot could ever hope to match. That single artist-driven decision completely transformed the movie's tone and its legacy. Instead of becoming just another generic monster in a US city flick, 20 Million Miles to Earth became a strange, poetic, and visually stunning collision between the deep, ancient history of Western civilization and a new, terrifying, and unknown cosmic threat. The iconic Colosseum battle wasn't filmed on location. That unforgettable and tragic final battle, where the full-grown Ymir fights off tanks and soldiers atop the crumbling ruins of the ancient Roman Colosseum, looks like it was filmed right in the heart of Italy. But the truth is, almost all of it was a masterpiece of smoke, mirrors, and miniature magic. The production only captured a few necessary background plates and wide shots in Rome. The rest of the entire sequence, every shot involving the creature, the soldiers, and the destruction, was painstakingly built and filmed back in a studio in California. Ray Harryhausen and his small, dedicated team constructed an incredibly detailed, large-scale model of a section of the Colosseum. They then used a brilliant and labor-intensive process called dynamation, where they rear-projected the live-action footage of the soldiers, frame by frame, onto a screen behind the miniature set. Harryhausen would then animate his Ymir puppet, one tiny movement at a time, perfectly syncing its actions with the pre-filmed actors. Every crumble of stone, every puff of dust, every lurch of the creature was a separate, hand-animated frame of film. The result was pure, unadulterated movie magic. Audiences in 1957 had no idea they were watching a complex, handmade illusion. And even today, the seamless blend between the real footage and the miniature artistry still holds up frighteningly well. The Ymir's skin tone was personally adjusted by Harryhausen for the colorized version. When the film was being colorized for its home video release decades after it was made, Ray Harryhausen himself personally oversaw the process to ensure that the Ymir would finally get the colors he had always intended. On set, the actual stop-motion model of the creature had been painted a bright, almost garish green. This was done to make it stand out against the black and white background, not because Harryhausen ever thought the creature was actually bright green. For the new, colorized version, he was able to correct this. He opted for a much more subtle and realistic palette of muted olive greens and yellowish, earthy tones. A complex mix that made the creature feel less like a cartoon monster and more like a biologically believable, reptilian animal. This new and approved color palette brought out subtle textures that most audiences had never noticed in the black and white original. The tiny, scaled ridges along its back, the ribbed and muscular chest, and the faint, leathery shimmer along its spine. Suddenly, the Ymir didn't just move like a living being. He looked like one too. It's one of the rare cases in film history where a later colorization process actually honored and enhanced the artist's original vision, instead of simply ruining it, all because the artist himself was there to guide every single shade. Ray Harryhausen, the creator, appears briefly in the film uncredited blink and you'll miss it. But the stop-motion legend himself, Ray Harryhausen, actually sneaks into his own movie for a tiny, uncredited cameo. During the film's chaotic climax, as the Ymir is rampaging through the streets of Rome, Harryhausen can be spotted for a split second in the crowd of fleeing, terrified citizens. He is, quite literally, running from his own creation. This became a fun and subtle trademark for the animator, a way to put a personal, almost Hitchcockian stamp on his productions. For Harryhausen, it was more than just a quick joke. He often said in interviews that he liked to be there with the creatures, even if it was just for a fleeting moment on film. It made the fantasy and the destruction feel more personal, as if the puppeteer was momentarily stepping inside the very nightmare that he had so painstakingly built, one frame at a time. It's the kind of quiet, humble Easter egg that perfectly fits the man himself, the calm, meticulous artist, secretly hidden inside the grand panic and spectacle he had brought to life. A real US Air Force colonel, advised on the rocket scenes for authenticity, to make the movie's opening act feel as authentic and grounded as possible. Columbia Pictures brought in a real US Air Force technical advisor, a colonel, to consult on the rocket design, the interior of the space capsule, and the technical jargon used by the astronaut characters. In the post-Sputnik 1950s, audiences were becoming more and more sophisticated about the realities of space travel, and the studio knew they couldn't get away with pure fantasy. The colonel made sure that the hardware, the cockpit switches, the radio chatter, and the rescue procedures all echoed the look and feel of real-world test flight footage from the era. This extra layer of realism gave the film's opening minutes a surprising and powerful sense of credibility, which was crucial for a sci-fi story that was about to introduce a creature from Venus. That small but important touch of authenticity made audiences believe, at least for a few minutes, that a manned flight to Venus might actually be possible, making the discovery of the Ymir all the more shocking and believable. The alien Venus egg was a prop made from a rubber balloon and plaster. The translucent, gelatinous alien egg, which was actually a canister, that hatches the baby. Ymir wasn't a fancy, expensive prop. It was a classic example of low-budget B-movie ingenuity. The effects team, working with limited resources, built the prop using a common rubber balloon. They coated the balloon with layers of plaster to create the canister's shape, and then painted it to look fleshy and extraterrestrial. But under the hot and unforgiving studio lights, the simple prop became a production nightmare. The plaster-covered balloon kept softening, cracking, and even collapsing in the middle of a shot. The crew had to frantically rebuild and patch it between takes, all while Ray Harryhausen was trying to animate the emerging creature in one painstaking frame at a It's a perfect and comical snapshot of 1950s sci-fi production, a world where futuristic alien technology was really just glue. Plaster, a balloon, and a whole lot of desperate, on-the-fly patience from the crew. It was one of Harryhausen's toughest and most complex stop-motion jobs. Animating the Ymir wasn't just another creature assignment for Ray Harryhausen. It was, at the time, a technical and logistical nightmare of precision. Unlike most of his earlier monsters, which were often kept separate from the human actors, the Ymir had to share the screen constantly with real actors, real animals like the elephant in the zoo, and real moving sets. Every single twitch, every blink, every muscle flex, and every step had to be animated to sync up perfectly with the live-action footage that had already been shot, all while being composited together in the camera, frame by painstaking frame. Harryhausen later described the film as the most exhausting project I'd done up to that point. More than 400 complex composite shots were required for the film, and one tiny mistake, one slight bump of the camera or the model, could ruin hours of meticulous work. He often animated for days on end, alone in a dark room, adjusting the tiny metal armatures of his puppet with a surgeon's focus. The irony of all that effort is that it made the Ymir feel more human and more soulful than most of the film's actual human characters, which is exactly why audiences felt such pity for it in the end. The creature had 2 complete models, and both miraculously survived most movie monsters and props from the 1950s, especially from low-budget B-movies, didn't make it past the final cut. They were often burned, lost, cannibalized for parts for the next film, or simply thrown in the trash. But the Ymir was different. Ray Harryhausen, a meticulous craftsman, built 2 full 12-inch tall metal armature models for the film. One was the primary hero puppet, used for most of the close-ups and dramatic scenes, and a second, slightly different model was used for the wider destruction scenes, like the battle with the elephant. Against all odds, both of these original models survived the production and were carefully preserved by Harryhausen in his personal collection for decades. They were eventually restored and are now displayed in museums and exhibitions around the world, where they are treated like the holy relics of stop-motion animation. It's an almost poetic fate. The creature that couldn't survive its encounter with Earth in the movie somehow managed to outlive nearly every other monster of its time in real life. The Ymir's terrifying roar was borrowed from other monster movies. That eerie, guttural growl that the Ymir lets out as it rampages through the Roman streets wasn't a unique or original sound at all. It was, in fact, a classic case of 1950s sound design recycling. Columbia's audio team, working on a tight budget, simply pulled the sound effect from their pre-existing library. The Ymir's main roar was a stock sound that had been used just a couple of years earlier for the giant, rampaging octopus and Harryhausen's other classic. It came from beneath the sea. They also tweaked and mixed in other sound elements to give the Ymir its distinct voice. Fans who listen closely can even catch brief hints of those earlier creatures buried under the distortion. It's a perfect example of classic 1950s movie magic: reuse, remix, and disguise. Back then, originality in sound design often came from how cleverly you could reassemble and manipulate the sounds that you already had. The original ending of the film was much darker and more tragic. In the earliest drafts of the script, the Ymir wasn't supposed to die in a spectacular, fiery battle at the Colosseum. The original ending was much quieter, darker, and far more tragic. In that version, the creature, wounded and alone after its battle with the elephant, was meant to stumble through the streets of Rome and make its way to the Tiber River. It would then slip into the water and sink beneath the dark waves as the military watched, helpless from the shore. The idea was to end on a powerful note of tragedy and melancholy, not a triumphant action sequence. But Columbia Pictures wanted a bigger, more spectacular, and more definitive finale for their monster movie. The ancient Roman Colosseum became the perfect symbolic stage for one last epic battle. It was a decision that turned a quiet, mournful death into a mythic and unforgettable showdown. Still, that original lost ending lingers, a sad image of the creature fading beneath the water, forever lost, forgotten, and misunderstood. It was the last black and white feature film Ray Harryhausen ever made. 20 million miles to Earth marked the definitive and quiet end of an entire era for its creator. After this film, the master, Ray Harryhausen, never returned to black and white filmmaking, starting with his very next project, the 1958 classic The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. All of his fantastical worlds exploded into vibrant, dazzling Technicolor. It was a bold and permanent shift that would change how audiences saw fantasy and science fiction forever. Color gave his creatures a new and brilliant life, but it also meant saying goodbye to the moody, high-contrast, noir-like shadows and the gothic, otherworldly textures that made his early black and white work, like The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, feel so mysterious and so haunting. The Ymir, with its simple, gray-toned skin, was the very last of those classic monochrome monsters that looked like they had crawled directly out of a beautiful old nightmare. It's a fitting and poignant distinction. The final black and white, Harryhausen creature was also his most soulful and most tragic one. The film inspired key scenes in Jurassic Park and Cloverfield decades after its release. 20 million miles to Earth was still quietly echoing through the halls of Hollywood, inspiring a new generation of filmmakers. The legendary director Steven Spielberg has openly credited Ray Harryhausen's work, and especially the Ymir's rampage through Rome, as a major and direct influence on how he staged the dinosaur attacks in his 1993 blockbuster, Jurassic Park. The brilliant mix of awe, danger, and a strange sympathy for the creature came straight from the Harryhausen playbook. Later, the 2008 monster hit Cloverfield borrowed that same core philosophy. Its monster wasn't portrayed as pure evil, but as a lost, confused, and terrified baby, panicking in a world it doesn't understand. The exact same motivation that drove the Ymir. Even the chaotic, handheld camera angles and the street-level destruction shots in Cloverfield mirror the desperate, ground-level chaos of Harryhausen's handmade finale. In other words, the Ymir never really died in that Roman street. It just evolved, from stop-motion to CGI, from a B-movie myth to an enduring cinematic legacy. 20 million miles to Earth wasn't just another 1950s monster flick. It was a profound and important turning point. Ray Harryhausen, at the peak of his black and white powers, turned simple rubber and metal into pure, unadulterated emotion. He proved that even a creature from Venus, a monster in the eyes of the world, could make audiences feel a deep and abiding sympathy instead of just cheap fear. The film brilliantly mixed the anxieties of science fiction with a deep, almost classical sorrow, creating a spectacle that also had a soul. Decades later, that powerful and unique blend still hits. Every roar, every slow and heavy stumble through the streets of Rome, every single frame that Harryhausen moved by hand, it all still feels painfully and beautifully alive. It's the kind of timeless movie that reminds you that monsters aren't always born evil. Sometimes they are just lost, and they are made into monsters by a world that is too afraid to understand them.